Hello, happy Friday. I am so excited to be going live today. My name is Haley Hayhurst, and I am the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency specializing in marketing, editing, and strategy. So today we are talking about how to do better interviews for your podcast. This topic is near and dear to my heart because I speak with a lot of podcasters. In fact, I was speaking with one of my clients yesterday who is just so nervous to do interviews. Her podcast is so fun. She is such a creative person. Her voice is amazing, and her solo episodes, she's won awards for it. But she wants to start doing interviews and is so nervous to talk to people and so nervous to interview people. I find this is really common when you may be interviewing an expert in a certain topic that you're not an expert in, if that makes sense. We have guests on our podcast to enhance what we're doing. We have guests on our podcast to enhance our message, enhance our audience experience, and of course, grow our reach. But the real goal is to connect with the right people and have the right guest on that will actually help you become an expert in your own industry. So, for instance, I interview people who in all different industries. That's kind of, any podcaster or entrepreneur with a certain topic or a certain business, I interview them to hear about how they got to that part of their business and their life. So I interview a lot of experts in fields that I'm not an expert in, but that doesn't mean I can't show up to the interview prepared, excited, and very informed on the topic. Of course, I do my research. I have my questions. I know what I'm going to ask them. And then they lead the conversation in the expert way. So when I'm a guest on podcasts and someone may not be an expert in podcast marketing or podcast strategy, they ask me the questions that lead to the answers. So I want to get into 5 steps of how you can better interview people. Because if you're not confident and you're not really sure about how to interview, it's going to come off that way. It's really going to come off in a way that maybe you aren't the expert at all, but you want to be. So I want to help you sound professional and show up confidently to any interview. It doesn't matter if this person has 0 followers or if this person has 100,000 followers. We're going to show up very excited and very informed to every interview that we conduct. So the first step that I would recommend is to create a Google form where you can get all of their information easily. This includes their links, this includes their bio, this includes topics that they want to talk about. Because of course you're in charge of where the conversation goes, but you really want to be informed about everything that they want to talk about. So let's say you have a podcast about the wellness industry and they're a certain niche in the wellness industry. Okay, ask them what are some topics that you want to discuss, and that way you can form questions around what they are the expert in. Because if they sound like an expert and you're asking the right questions, you also will sound like an expert. So make sure you're not asking questions that don't really relate to their industry or are just so out there that they are like, oh, I don't know, that's an interesting question. You don't want that answer. You want them to have a good answer for everything. So getting their bio and asking them what topics they would like to discuss are a great way to start. The next thing that I would recommend you to do, and this is so necessary, do your research. I was a guest on my friend's podcast. It's called the For Folk's Sake podcast, and we really didn't know each other before this interview. But she asked me such detailed questions about my background in journalism. I went to school for journalism at UNLV. She knew that. She knew I used to work at UFC. She knew I used to write for NPR. She knew all of these things that I didn't even include that in my bio. She did her research on me so she could ask me questions about my background in PR, about my background writing and interviewing and all of those things. And so it was just incredible. It was such an incredible experience to have the host actually know who I was. I've also been on some podcasts that is just so generic that we don't really get into the details of anything, really. It's just all surface level. And that's because the host isn't prepared. So do your research, know your guest's background, and know what questions you want to ask them. If you want to ask them questions about their background, amazing, because that'll make them open up more. I opened up so much more once she was asking me these questions about my past and my personal life, because I was like, she cares about this interview. She cares about her podcast. I can put a link to that interview down below. It was so much fun, and you can kind of hear the difference between if she was just asking me, oh, how do you start a podcast? Rather than, oh, you had a podcast in college. I would love to hear about how you incorporated that into your journalism classes, or whatever she asked. It was incredible. So do your research. Okay, the next step is to actually listen to your guest. There are 2 ways that you can interview someone. You can ask them questions and get an answer, or you can have a conversation with them. You can lead with questions and then have a conversation after. Whatever style you want to do, neither is wrong. I more enjoy the conversation type of interview, but if your podcast is more question, answer, and that's your style, that's totally fine. But I heard this saying actually from the host of the For Folk's Sake podcast. It was, are you listening to answer, or are you listening to understand? Okay, and when she said that, it kind of just made something switch in my mind of, yeah, you need to be listening to answer, but you also need to be listening to understand your guest. Because once you understand your guest, and let's say that they give you a sentence that you're like, oh my gosh, that sounded amazing, and I want to ask you more questions about this certain topic, the conversation can totally shift into something more amazing than maybe you even prepared for. So actually listen to what your guest is saying, listen to their answers, and then have a conversation with them. Obviously stay on topic, don't get too far out there, but it can go in so many different ways that maybe you didn't even imagine before the interview started. So listen to understand. Okay, the next tip I have for you is to plan ahead. Now, the 2 things that I do before and after interviews is prep and post, I don't know what the word is, my guests. And so to prep them, I send them an email about how you can access the interview, questions I ask about the podcast, how to record, kind of the surrounding that you need to be in. It really has all of the details of what they need to get ready for this interview. And so they can show up confidently, and they can show up with the right audio. They can show up looking good, because I record video, but if I didn't tell them, they might show up in their pajamas and then be really embarrassed, and the interview will not go well. And so I prep them really, really well through this email. And then after the interview is over and we're getting close to the date that it's going to launch, I send them another email with a recap thanking them. I send them the assets to post, like what I'm going to post to promote it, and just any post interview things so I love writing. I have a background in journalism. And so I give them a sample caption to use, because some of my guests, it really depends on who my guest is. Some of my guests don't like writing. Some of them I can just tell from their social medias that writing is not their thing. And so I want to make it as easy for them as possible. And I want my podcast to look professional, and I want them to look professional. So I give them some sample captions. You don't have to do this if you don't love writing, but it's what I like to do, so I do it. And all of my guests have really been appreciative of that. The last thing that I need you to do to prepare for an interview and get better interviews is to know your goal. Why are you having this guest on? What do you want to talk about, and where do you want the conversation to go? Like I was saying, it can go in a couple different ways depending on how it really, where the conversation decides to go. But you need to have your end goal in mind, because if you get lost along the way, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go in the way that you want it to go. I had a client come to me, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and I interviewed her episode. It was good. It was a little long, but it was good. And she listened afterwards, and she was like, "Did you think it was interesting? I had so much fun recording it, but now that I'm listening, I think it might be a little slow." And that can all be because you don't know the goal of where you want the episode to go. And so I need you to think about that before you even start recording and before you even reach out to the guest. Next week I'll be talking about how to prepare for interviews from the guest perspective. And this is really on both of you. The guest needs to know where the conversation is going to go, what action they want to achieve in it, if they want your audience to come and follow them after, or if they have a special offer or whatever that is. But then you also need to know where you want the conversation to go for your audience. And so if that makes sense, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of all of these 5 tips. Just to recap, get their bio and additional information. Do your research, their deep research. Go on their LinkedIn. Find their Facebook from high school. I don't know. Actually listen to understand, not just to respond. Plan ahead and know the goal. So I am really excited to let everyone know that I'm launching my first course all about how to be a better guest and how to be a better host. So this is going to be a really fun mini course that I am launching next week. And it goes into how to find guests, how to interview guests confidently, and then also how to be a confident guest and how to interview confidently. So we go into a lot of details, and it's really, really informative. And it's gonna be, not, so you guys will all get a nice 20% discount if you send me a message just for coming to this live. But I really want this to be very informative and accessible to everyone. So I will drop all of the details this weekend or early next week when the course launches. But it's so exciting that my first course is finally coming out. And so I would love your support, and I would love to hear some feedback if you were interested in, how to be a better guest or how to be a better guest or host. And it's just going to be awesome. So send me a message that you were here at the live and you want that discount, and I will send you that discount code. But this has been so fun. If you have any questions about any of the topics that I discussed today about being a better host, send me a message here on Facebook, or you can also send me a message on Instagram. It's Espresso Podcast Production. And you can also email me at hello@espressopodcastproduction.com. So I am around if you have any questions, and I will talk to you all next week about how to be a better guest. All right, talk soon.